Okay, I have with me today Colonel Tony Shaffer. We're going to be going over the Russia-Ukraine situation, maybe talk a little bit about Vladimir Putin, Finland, a little bit on China. We're also going to talk about some 9/11 information that the American public has maybe never heard about, and it should be a very good discussion. Colonel, thank you so much for being on today's show and taking time out of your day to go through this with us.
Stephen, I always enjoy being on with you. Thank you for having me, and I enjoy the clarity of your questions, which makes it easy to answer. So it's good to be here.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Just before we jump in, down below in the comments section, I'll be putting information about your show, about my newsletter, and this month's giveaway. So make sure to check down below. But let's just go ahead and jump in with the first question.
Sure.
Recently, I had on my show a former CIA agent by the name of Ray McGovern, and he mentioned in there near the end of our interview that he believes that Putin and Russia likely got China's permission or blessing right around the time of the Olympics to go ahead and launch this attack on Ukraine. And now it appears that China is coming in thinking that Russia has gone too far, and it's stepping over the interests of China to build their one belt, one road initiative to Western Europe. What are your thoughts on China's role in the beginning of this, the middle, and what we're seeing now with this opportunity to push for peace?
Right. So China is more focused, I think, on its overall global future. That is to say, how it becomes the major hegemon of the planet. That's kind of their long-term objective, as I've seen it. Now, what has instructed me, Stephen, is the fact that about 10 years ago, at a think tank I served at, was the Center for Advanced Defense Studies. We actually took on a project called the Inside Out study for Boeing Phantom Works. And basically, we were asked to become China. We, the think tank and our personnel. So we studied their actions from how they view the world. And I think arguably, we all too often, as America, especially our politicians, project U.S. values and interests onto others in their behavior. So my perspective is always instructed by that study. And so I believe that China, in its heart of hearts, the collective leadership, believe that they are destined to essentially establish themselves as the global authority on most things. And their belief is our law, that is Chinese law, is older than yours. The Ming Dynasty, all these other past geographic expansions of their country, they believe anything they touched at one point is theirs. They just want it back. And they believe their law is older than our law. So as you see their actions, I always try to interpret them based on this my understanding of who they are. They're much more nationalistic than they are communistic at this point. Yeah, they have a communist system, but they've already embraced a lot of free market values. They're clearly doing things to expand their authority and ability to influence globally. So that's the way I see them. So that's I wanted to lay that out before I answer the question regarding Putin. So Putin and company were about to invade. I was one of those that said, yeah, he's going to go. The last indicator happened in December that indicated to me, Stephen, that Putin was going to invade. And that little indicator came from one of our senior intelligence officers, Pete O'Brien, Navy captain retired. And he said he saw Putin's yacht move out of Bremen, Germany. Like, oh, he doesn't want his yacht to be caught in Germany when the war starts. So that, I said, based on that alone, that's it. They're going. And they're, oh, you're crazy. No, it's just, you just look at things, and sometimes you just got to look at the bottom of a teacup and see what you see. And I thought that was significant enough to indicate it. But they waited, Stephen, until the Olympics were done. And yes, I do believe there was coordination between Xi and Putin. And I think it's a relationship and coordination based on convenience, because the other thing that Putin did with Xi was prepare for the economic sanctions which were coming. They had already prepared, the Russians, that is, to work around those sanctions. China was there. And in exchange, China is going to grow their road into back into Europe, Russians are going to support that. And more importantly, in exchange for that too, is virtually unlimited sources of reliable energy, because that's the one thing China does not have a good supply of. That's why our interests with India, the Philippines, Vietnam, all those interests really could work to undermine the Chinese economy if we so chose, because of the States of Malacca, South China Sea, and all the oil that has to come through those areas from the Middle East. So to get out of that potential quagmire of dependence, of having to allow for that oil to go through, they can set up pipelines and other exchanges directly between Russia and China. So clearly these things are all in China's interest, and yeah, they're clearly coordinating with Putin. The war starts, it goes not so well for either side, I might add. I mean, neither side is actually achieving any great. It's just a slugfest, and I feel terrible for the Ukrainian people having to endure this. But both governments are cut from the same cloth. They're all part of the old Soviet state. They're all oligarchs. I just, again, I don't take sides. Stephen, I would, if a yeast infection and a fungus decided to fight, I wouldn't take a side in that. And that's the way I look at this right now. And I hate to be that kind of over the top, but that's the way I look at it. And so so the Chinese basically said, yeah, go do your war, whatever. It doesn't really impact us. Well, now it's starting to impact, because I think it is starting to have impact on the global economy in ways that I think everybody knew would happen. And I think that's why China really wants this wrapped up. It's like, okay, come on, get it done. It's time to get on to other business. So I think that's why Xi came up with this 12-point plan. The Russians clearly said, oh, yeah, we're interested. And of course, we said, no, we're not interested, because we want to fund our phony baloney war. I could just see Biden in the office, like Governor Lepetemain, war, just like in Blazing Saddles. So I think that's where the lines have been drawn at this point. So yeah, I think there was coordination. I think the Chinese had no problem with the war as long as it didn't impact their long-range goals. I think there's some spillage over now where some of their goals are being impacted on a little bit. That is Xi in China. So I think that they do want this all wrapped up as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that feedback.
Yeah.
So Finland has now joined NATO. We've officially broken another promise of not pushing NATO any further to the east.
Yep.
Finland, as you know, sits right on Russia's border. Do you think Russia will make any future moves against Finland, or is there real beef at this point with Ukraine and keeping NATO from basically taking over Ukraine?
This is again, Seymour, where we have to look at this through the Russian and Finnish eyes. The animosity between Russia and Finland go back before World War II. Much of what people have forgotten, in the late 30s, there was fights over land. As a matter of fact, in 39, there's the famous invasion by the Soviets into Finland, and they suffered great casualties. I mean, if you want to talk about a completely ineffective Soviet-Russian military, that was it, because it was right after the purges where Stalin had taken and gotten rid of any officer that had half a brain, because they were a threat. So in 39, the Finnish did eventually just beat the Russians to a bloody pulp, but the Russians still won because they had overwhelming numbers. So it's kind of deja vu all over again regarding Ukraine. It's like, yeah, you can beat them to a pulp, but they still got the numbers. So I understand the Finnish concerns, I do. And this is where I also sympathize with the Poles to a certain extent, because both of those nations have suffered detrimental actions from the Russians, from the Soviets. And I would argue Putin is, as I've said before about Putin, you can take the man out of the Soviet, you can't just take the Soviet out of the man. And I think that's where Putin's at right now. So I think Finland has seen concerns regarding what happened in Ukraine. I think there will be disputes. And I think this is where the real danger comes regarding NATO, because if one of those disputes kicks over into something more serious, yeah, you could see NATO having to come to the aid of Finland. So I don't see this as necessarily a positive thing. I understand why Finland did it, but I don't know if they've really thought this through, because I think that's a long simmering regional dispute. It has some real potential for some problems down the road. I don't think those regional disputes are resolved between Russia and Finland, just saying. So.
Okay, yeah, I kind of felt the same way, where it was like, okay, I can see why they would want NATO in their corner, and this, if we attack Finland, we attack NATO. But at the same time, they escalate this against Putin, where he now feels more threatened. They're obviously going to put military presence in the area on the border. Whether it goes anywhere or not, I don't really know. But it does appear that Lloyd Austin will be going to Finland later this month to coordinate our two different militaries, their interaction and planning, so that the United States can basically start using Finland's military capabilities to our advantage. Switching gears, let's go back to Ukraine. I think at this point, I don't know that it's been made official, but it kind of has, that Russia has taken Bakhmut, or at least enough of the city to claim a victory. Do you think Zelensky will finally order troops to fall back, or is he going to stubbornly dig in and try to hold out till the very end, because this fight is now it's being fought on the world stage through the media?
Well, I think this is a tough one. This is a tough one, no doubt. So much is at stake. And again, Stephen, I try to see these things through the eyes of the people we're talking about, not our eyes. And unfortunately, I think Zelensky is going to do everything he can to make sure that there's some perception, if not a reality, that Bakhmut has not fallen. As I look at it, and I've listened to my updates last night in prep for this, I think Bakhmut is pretty much under Russian control. They're going to change the name again apparently soon, so I think it's an indicator. But I think as long as there's any element of any Ukrainian military force still alive in the city, they're going to say it hasn't fallen. I just don't see where the Ukrainians have the logistics or military combat power available to do much more than like you say, just make a propaganda point saying, "Oh no, it's not fallen." But they've placed significant emotional value on Bakhmut. The Russians are the Russians, they're just kind of slogging away. Again, we just talked about Finland earlier. The Russians are going to slog away because they can. And I do believe, Doug Macgregor talks about this in a little bit more detail than I do. I don't know, because he talks about the Russians wanting to be more careful about saving lives. I don't know if I see it that way. I think the Russians are Russians, and they're going to slog it out, and they're going to, take whatever punishment they need to achieve a military victory. So at this point, I think the Ukrainians and Zelensky is going to try to make a bitter stand, even if that means wasting another probably battalion, maybe brigade of forces in this just fruitless defense of Bakhmut.
Okay, thank you. The United States Senate finally voted to repeal congressional war authorization for military use in Iraq. Why did it take 20 years? And why, to this day, are so many Democrat and Republican leaders so reluctant to end this tragic and wasteful war?
Well, two reasons. And interesting, I don't know, Stephen, if you caught the hearing where the Republicans in the House asked directly to Lloyd Austin, will our removing the AUMF for Iraq have any impact on DOD? And Austin was fairly honest, like, yeah, no, not really. Yeah, no, not really, because we haven't been engaged in combat for, actual combat for a long time. And oh, by the way, Lloyd Austin was one of the guys who screwed up our exit because of the status of forces agreement. It's like, I think we could go down a whole nother rabbit hole on that, but I won't. But he did say the AUMF for Afghanistan still gives them the authority they need. It's like, what authority is that? Because all the 9/11 hijackers and those who supported them have either been killed, captured, or otherwise taken care of. So in my judgment, Stephen, both AUMFs need to go away. I think there's three actually, but to me, an AUMF, an authorized use of military force, is an open blank check for the executive to do whatever he or she wants anytime they want without regard to oversight. Yeah, they have to notify Congress, but it's like, hey, I went and bombed something, give me more money. That's all it is. There's so much reliance on these documents for overall military operations, and I think it's unhealthy. It's not proper. And again, anytime you have sustained military action, that is to say something that goes on, and I would even define anything longer than 6 months. If you're going to be somewhere more than 6 months, you need to go to Congress and say, I plan on putting military forces at this location, and then reauthorize it every year. Like Korea, South Korea. I think we should go through an annual debate of should we have forces in Korea or not. I think we should. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but I'm saying, why don't we have the debate? And that's why the AUMF is so politically valuable, Stephen, to the political class, because hey, hands off. It's like, oh, we've done our job. You guys go do your thing. So that's what's dangerous. And so that's why the Pentagon likes the AUMF, because, oh, we can just plan things and go to the president and get it done. We have very little oversight. And that's why Congress likes it, because it's like, hey, it's not our fault. We just gave them the authorization. We don't know what they're doing. So Congress has neglected its Article 2 responsibilities by pulling this stuff. It's Article 3 responsibilities by doing this nonsense. So it's just stupid. So I don't know what to tell you other than we don't need the AUMFs. We should have never gone down that path. As a matter of fact, arguably, Stephen, we didn't need an AUMF to go take care of the issues regarding the 9/11 attacks. The AUMF, I think, got us into a lot of trouble, because once you authorize something, DoD starts looking for missions. And I'm not the only one that says this. I've talked to chairmen of the Joint Chiefs who say, man, they're trying to push me to approve something that I know they shouldn't do, because they're there. They want to do stuff. And that's not wise. And the other thing, obviously, not relating to DoD, but kind of relating to DoD because of NSA, the Patriot Act came out of this too, which is completely insane based on retrospect. So I think anytime Congress can give its authority away, it tends to do that, and then the political class is protected by doing that. So that's why it took that long to get rid of the AUMF for Iraq, and that's why we still have the one for Afghanistan, even though we're not in Afghanistan now. I mean, geez, but we still have it, and that apparently, according to Lloyd Austin, gives him all the authority he needs, unquote, to do what he thinks he needs to do regarding global terrorism.
Well, you and I will be alive in 20 years when they finally get rid of the Afghanistan one. Okay, you've brought up 9/11 a couple of times. Offline, you and I spoke about some of the, for lack of a better word, undercover military stuff that you and your team were doing prior to 9/11, prior to all the technology and databases and everything. I think that this would be really insightful for people. But walk us through some of the missions and the intel that you guys were gathering, how the US government ignored that. 9/11 happens, and now the defense lawyers for the pilots and terrorists in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, are now saying it appears the United States government played some kind of role in this. Walk us through all of that, because I found it to be just absolutely insightful.
So to begin, I guess, with the end, the 9/11 terrorists are being defended by a team that's run by the Pentagon. It's basically they have a commission that's helping defend them, and there's investigators who have now found evidence that maybe the U.S. government knew a lot more about the 9/11 attacks and what they led on. So the bottom line up front is the defense that apparently they're going to go with for the 9/11 hijackers is, oh, the government knew, and we were duped. The Lee Harvey. If you want to go back and look at Lee Harvey Oswald's defense, like, hey, I'm the dupe. Maybe he did it, maybe he didn't. They're doing the same defense. So beginning with that is kind of, this is the current situation. And Stephen, that's huge. If it turns out to be true, that if the documentary evidence that the investigators come up with as part of this 9/11 commission, defense commission for the terrorists, shows linkage, that's a headline right there. That's a huge headline. It rewrites the entire history of the 9/11 attacks to include the 9/11 commission.
Yeah, I don't know
So
that I don't know that most Americans will be able to wrap their mind around that. But you're saying Pentagon assigned lawyers are defending these people, and they're finding that there may have been some assistance or at least knowledge, but stepping out of the way. I think if this comes out 20 years, 22 years later, it's going to really fry the brain of the American people. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no, no, and I think that's what people need to understand is that you actually have this element. And just so we're clear, it's called the Military Commissions Defense Organization, and that is the team that's actually defending the 9/11 hijackers. It's like a public defender, only run by the Pentagon. It's great. It's like, and they got their own investigators. So the investigators think that they've circled the squares. Like, yeah, our guys are guilty, but you guys were part of it.
Yeah.
So this is huge, and this is kind of already simmering in the media. So it's not like this is not known. It's just like it's simmering. It's coming. So with that as kind of the backdrop, let's go back to what I did in the late '90s. Before anybody understood the internet, Stratus Ivy, my little task force, there's the certificate for it there on my wall. Stratus Ivy was a special mission task force that was focused on weaponized technology, weaponization of technology. Some of the things that we now talk about as common, we were just getting into. And one of our missions was to examine Al-Qaeda as a global threat, because when we were looking at this, Al-Qaeda was just rising. They had just done the Africa attacks. They were a known global threat. So Special Operations Command, General Schoonmaker, had come up with a plan with Hugh Shelton then being the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, to figure out a way to map, identify targets, and then on call, execute offensive counterterrorism operations against Al-Qaeda leadership. And that plan was called Able Danger. Able Danger was I know who wrote it, and I know how it got approved. Was the first ever operations plan that gave Special Operations Command the lead. Basically, SOCOM was the lead dog. Normally, Stephen, you have all these commands globally. You got PACOM, EUCOM. Those folks are the ones usually in charge of operations. Now, this was the first time you had a SOCOM being the lead, first ever. And the whole idea was simply to look at new technology, which we went with data mining, because nobody knew data mining could be done. Yeah. To look at the global threat. How do you map a threat that has no boundaries, has no borders? Well,
yeah, at this point, nobody even knows what the word Al-Qaeda means.
Right.
Yeah.
So we start doing this deep targeting. We do very extensive data runs, 6-month data runs. What took us 6 months to do could be done literally minutes now. But back in those days, to get 3 terabytes of data, you had to have spiders on the internet. You had to do all these databases. It took 6 months to do all that. And then once we got it together, using data mining, we had discovered 2 of the 3 cells which conducted the 9/11 attacks. That's it. We just, through this data mining, through all this crunching of data, we found the cells which related to the Brooklyn cell that had conducted the 93 World Trade Center bombers. And that's how we did it. We digitized the profile of those bombers. Like, hey, these guys attempted to bomb the World Trade Center. Here's all these people globally. Took the profiles. Like, take these guys and let's take these guys and go look for similar people. Look for people who fit that profile. That's it. That's how we did it. This is not rocket science. And that's how we identified individuals who were of the same profile, and then where they were located, the physical location. And that's how we did it. And so what became controversial, Stephen, is that first off, that we were doing this because these guys were here. Most of the guys we targeted or identified were here. And we were told, oh, you can't look at those because they're here legally. We're treating them as U.S. citizens.
Meaning they were on American soil.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Yeah. And we're saying these guys are directly linked to terrorists. They fit the profile and they actually have direct connections with Al-Qaeda leadership. So this is a bad idea to, putting stickies over the face of these guys. And everything I'm talking about is laid out in my testimony, both open and closed. And we still haven't got to the closed testimony. That's still something I've not been able to talk to a great deal about. I did back in 2004 and 2005. With that said, let's keep going. So this organization puts, Special Operations Command puts us together to basically map these guys out and then be ready to go attack them. And then somehow that all got shoved aside in 2000. Like, yeah, we're not going to do that now. And we're all sitting there like, what the hell's going on? Why, why aren't we being permitted to go do what we're supposed to do, which is kill terrorists? I mean, Al-Qaeda was getting more and more aggressive. And then Nicole happened, October of 2000, Nicole. It's like, okay, these guys are serious. So it was just a mystery to us, because all of a sudden, when Bush 43 rolls in January of 2001, the whole project shut down. We're all told, thanks for your interest in national defense, we're done. It's like, really? Did you not just see Nicole get attacked? And so we're just behind the scenes, like, operatives, like, what the hell's going on? Why aren't we being permitted to go do what we're supposed to do? Yeah. And then most importantly, Stephen, when the DOD lawyer said, you can't look at these guys here in the United States because they're US citizens or being treated as US citizens, we tried to pass it to the FBI. I tried at least 3 different times. This has been documented in hearings, and at least one of the meetings I attempted to set up was verified by DOD lawyers, because they canceled it, that we tried to pass this basic data. The fact that we had done this data mining, the data mining had resulted in the identification of individuals who had direct links to Al-Qaeda. Those individuals with direct links were actually in the United States. We tried to pass that as predicate for criminal and counterterrorism investigations by the FBI. We weren't permitted to do that. That's one of the controversies to this day. And it was based on the Jamie Gorelick memo, saying that intel and law enforcement couldn't share, which to this day, I've never understood the logic in that memo. And that's another reason Jamie Gorelick should not have been on the 9/11 Commission, just saying. I mean, it's like, are you really serious about that? So that's what happened. And so my belief is, yeah, something happened, because we weren't prevented to go after them. We were shut down right before 9/11. Why? We don't know. And then obviously it's clear that other organizations may have been told to take a powder as well. And I think that's why the current investigations by the commission, linking things back to what we as witnesses, in my case, a whistleblower, kind of validates what we've been saying. It's like, yeah, something was really wrong about the 9/11 attacks, and the whole 9/11 Commission report is just essentially a work of fiction that was designed to basically cover the ass of those who were guilty of whatever happened.
Yeah, it reminds me of the I believe it's called the Warren Commission, where many of the people that were against President John F. Kennedy end up getting themselves placed on the very commission to investigate his death, even though they disliked him, they wanted him to go to war, all these reasons, and then suddenly they're put on the committee to investigate his death, and we can't figure it out, you're saying it was kind of a similar thing there. Do you think that had the first question I have is, like, did that have anything to do with just the change of the guard? Okay, new president, new vice president coming in, or do you think they were aware of that, just like you were on the Trump transition team? You knew what needed to transition and what didn't. So now here comes Dick Cheney from the military industrial complex. They're needing money. Could that have played any role in the at least stepping aside and not using this intel to stop or block this attack?
Well, I know that's the excuse they've used. I don't believe it. I think when you come in at that level, you hear everything that's going on. And I know for a fact that the final briefing to Hugh Shelton, when he was still chairman of the Joint Chiefs, happened in January of 2001. So I'm sure Shelton went in to the president and said, look, this is one of the things we're looking at. So I don't believe for a minute, especially since the COLA just happened. I mean, I've been in the room with these guys. I've been in the room with Tenet, because I used to have to brief them every 6 months on the operations I was running, because we were, for your audience to understand, there's 2 different categories of intelligence collection, sort of. Title 50, which is the basic authorities for national security that includes CIA authorities, and then Title 10. You can do intelligence type stuff under Title 10 because it's traditional military activities. Basically, it's hard to explain, but anything George Washington did with the Continental Army, you can do under Title 10. That includes spying. So there's a little loophole that we use. Anyway, so I had to brief Tenet on Title 10 stuff we were doing. And so I've been in the room with these guys. I've seen how they think. And I'm telling you right now, they knew it. And how else I know it, Stephen? Because Sandy Berger, there's a name for you. Sandy Berger, National Security Advisor under President Clinton, actually went and pulled out the able danger documents, the briefing documents that were used to brief them. And those are the documents he stuck down his pants and his socks to take out of the skiff to destroy. And this has been documented as well. Nobody seems to be interested. It's like, why did he do that? Because they knew, because this was already something that they had briefed and kept as set aside to give to the new administration. So again, that's where I think there's a clear handoff, not in a good way, of knowledge of this as an issue to both administrations.
Okay, just let me clarify. It's a lot to wrap my brain around as a newbie here. So
I'm sure for your audience too. So I'm sure.
Okay, so we have the Joe Biden scandal documents at the university and his garage by his Corvette. We have the Trump Mar-a-Lago documents. They're saying nobody takes these home. Now it turns out everybody takes some. You're saying when Sandy Berger took that stuff, stuffed it down his pants and his socks, those were the documents from the Clinton administration to the Bush administration about these threats?
Yep.
Oh my gosh. This is insane. I've been studying the 9/11 thing for 20 years. I remember, everybody remembers, I was in the Dominican Republic in an old abandoned zoo. It was raining cats and dogs. And the people told me, you might want to take cover. Your country's under attack. And I didn't speak Spanish well enough to fully grasp what was going on. I go back to the building where I'm living, and I see the second airplane hit, and I think, what in the world is going on? And now, all these years later, it's like, and everybody knows that there's something not right, but nobody wants to talk about it. And that's how they keep it from coming out, is that just nobody covers it.
So that's the thing, Stephen, remember who benefits? Cui bono is always. So remember, let's look back at the Sandy Berger thing just for 1 second. When that happened and he got caught, he got a little slap on the wrist, like, oh yeah, don't do that again. They wanted it to happen. Both sides wanted those documents out of reach of anybody like us to see what was being said. That's it. Both sides. That's Democrat, Republicans, or the mono party, whatever you want to call the folks who work together to keep the country doing whatever it's doing. So that's why there was just literally, think about this. These were top secret, beyond code word documents that he stole, physically took. No doubt he did it, dead to rights. And yet somehow he gets a slap on the wrist, and they suspend his clearance for a year. So I go, you can have your clearance back. Who does that? Nobody gets their clearance back after essentially committing an act of espionage, which that what it was. So, but somehow it was okay. Yeah, it's okay. No big deal. You get your clearance back. Think about that. So that didn't happen because one side or the other saw benefit. They both saw benefit, and that's why it was just a slap on the wrist. He was told to go do it. He did it, and everybody let it go. Wow. So why would you let it go? You let it go because they don't want it to come out.
So someone has a reason for it being let go. This has been a very insightful conversation. I know we could go deeper, but out of respect for people's ears and time, we'll cut it right there. Tell my listeners about your radio show, and then we'll wrap it up.
Sure. We have something called The Hard Truth with Tony Shaffer. We do it weekly on the America Out Loud network. We have a variety of guests who cover a range of topics, everything from guns with Adam Baldwin, the good Baldwin, Adam Baldwin, Mother Animal from Full Metal Jacket, to Judge Napolitano, to Doug Macgregor, to Dr. Corsi, Jerome Corsi. We want to be able to put out to the audience things that they that they need to learn. Hopefully they'll be interested. So thank you for letting me plug that, Stephen. And look, thank you again for allowing me the time to be with you and your audience. I always enjoy our conversations.
Yes, me too. Thank you so much for being on. Before you go, make sure to check down below. I'm going to put more information about the Colonel's show, about my newsletter, and about the giveaway that we're doing. Thank you so much for your time and this incredible, insightful conversation.